Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down the threat for a severe weather outbreak across a large chunk of the United States tomorrow. This will bring the threat for large to very large hail, damaging winds, and tornadoes. I'll give you the latest breakdown and everything that you need to know in this forecast, but let's first begin with what's happening across the United States right now that will lead to that threat of severe weather tomorrow. We're first going to begin with the eastern tier of the United States. That is where a low pressure system is currently located. This is what brought upwards of 30 inches of rain to Fort Lauderdale only a couple of days ago, and it also brought even a little bit of flooding along the Gulf Coast, but luckily this is starting to weaken inland, and it's not really bringing much of any threat of flooding or severe weather over the next few days. That'll eventually move off to the east and move out of the United States, but we have reasons to be thankful for this storm back over in the Central Plains because we do have a jet stream in place, but on the eastern side of that jet stream, we actually have weaker winds aloft, and that's really due to the fact we have this upper level disturbance that is really causing some really numerous impacts to the jet stream back over to the west. And what this is really going to do over the next 24 hours is limit the severe weather potential, at least over the Central Plains tonight. That is where the severe weather threat is much lower, but once this low pressure system moves off to the east and northeast, things begin to get much more rampant with that jet stream. It starts to re-strengthen, and you can notice this here on the European model tonight. The jet stream has a big wrinkle over the Central Plains. This is a very strong jet stream elsewhere, but over the Central Plains it's much weaker because of that. But once we go into tomorrow, it begins to re-strengthen, at least by tomorrow afternoon and evening. You might notice here across Missouri and back through Arkansas it becomes stronger. And why is this so important? Well, this is what helps to really intensify the updrafts and keep them longer lasting for these storms to live. So this is a big deal overall. So the severe weather potential will definitely increase as we go into tomorrow. In addition to that, this is a negatively tilted trough, and what that means is they'll have much stronger winds out of the south, pulling moisture out of the Gulf of Mexico and up to the north, which will increase the severe weather potential as well for both Saturday and maybe even Sunday across portions of the United States. So for tonight, a couple of isolated severe storms across Kansas and the Central Plains. Nothing too concerning, but some isolated large hail and damaging winds will be possible. By tomorrow, things get much more rampant. We'll be watching for a line of storms to develop and maybe a couple of discrete supercells across the lower Mississippi Valley and even back through the Midwest as we go into Saturday. And by Sunday, the severe weather threat does shift to the east, while we could see a small scale winter weather event back over in the Midwest. So there might be even a little bit of snow back near Chicago and Wisconsin. Overall, not too concerning, but there might be a few inches in some areas. Now let's take a deep dive into what's going to be happening across the United States tomorrow, beginning with a newly issued enhanced risk of severe weather. This extends from Missouri back through northern Louisiana, and the biggest concern for tomorrow will be the threat for large to very large hail. We could be very well talking about hail upwards of baseball size. Wouldn't even rule out an isolated hailstone a little bit larger than that. So keep that in mind if you're across this region. Take those proper precautions tonight and have multiple ways to receive alerts tomorrow in case you are under any severe thunderstorm warnings or tornado warnings. The damaging wind potential isn't a whole lot different. We do not have a hatched region, which basically means the highest wind gust will likely be somewhere in the ballpark of 70 to 75 miles per hour. But this doesn't mean you should blow off the threat, because we are still talking about numerous damaging winds across areas from central and southern Missouri back through northern Louisiana and even back through Wisconsin and Texas. We do have a chance for some isolated to maybe widely scattered damaging winds. Now, some good news, the tornado risk is actually not that high, and I don't expect this to really increase a whole lot. The low level jet will be pretty weak, which is those lower level winds that help rotate the supercells. We're really not going to be seeing much of a strong low level jet, but there is at least a conditional tornado risk embedded in that line of storms, and maybe a discrete supercell could produce maybe an isolated tornado or two. Wouldn't rule out a few tornadoes, but again, I think the threat overall is lower with this event. Now, when we're talking about the moisture content with this event, with that negatively tilted trough, we're going to have a huge pull of dew points back up in here to the Missouri, back through Arkansas. Dew points will get into the low to mid 60s, which is going to create a lot more buoyancy, which again is going to increase the severe weather potential across areas in the lower Mississippi Valley. And we could see severe weather back into the Midwest as well. Instability as well is going to be provided across areas in Arkansas. I do think the most significant severe weather potential for tomorrow will probably be here in Arkansas. That is where I have the greatest concern for some really numerous hailstones, upwards of baseball size, maybe even higher than that. We also could see some numerous damaging winds and maybe an isolated tornado or two. That is the most concerning area for tomorrow. Once we go into Sunday, I would say that the more concerning area for any severe weather, which I'm not too concerned about, would be back through the southeast and maybe a little conditional threat threat back through areas in Michigan and as well as through Virginia. So a lower end threat then. And I referenced the low-level jet a little while ago, and that's because that's what helps to rotate the supercells in the lower levels. And overall, the low-level jet is not going to be very, very strong tomorrow. There will be a low-level jet around 30 to 40 knots, but again, that's not too strong. So the tornado risk should stay low, maybe low to medium. It's not going to get really high at this point. The low-level jet is not forecasted to be strong out of this severe weather outbreak potential, so that's good news. It's really going to be more of a hail threat and as well as damaging winds. Now, in terms of the timing across the Central Plains for tonight, we'll have some storms fire up later this evening. If you're watching this video around 9 to 10 o'clock, there might already be storms out there, so keep that in the back of your head. Large hail and damaging winds is the main threat. Tornado risk is extremely low. Once we go into tomorrow, the threat for severe weather will ramp up back over in Missouri and Arkansas. We'll see storms explode tomorrow. I mean, we're talking about storms rapidly developing. The thing is, how long will these storms last with the significant hail threat and damaging wind potential? Well, here's Arkansas tomorrow. We'll probably see a discrete cell or two develop across Missouri and Arkansas around 2 to 5 o'clock. And those discrete supercells are the ones that are the most concerning for severe weather. You'll notice back up here in northwestern sections of Arkansas, that is where the HRR model is placing one of those discrete cells. By about 5 to 6 o'clock, that is when a linear line of storms will develop. Damaging winds becomes much more likely with this, and maybe an isolated embedded tornado or two in that line will be possible. Any tornadoes that happen in a line are typically brief and weak, but they are definitely going to be possible there. Damaging winds, the main concern, around 60 to 75 miles per hour. Might see some hail as well, and then that line will push through Memphis and eventually into Tennessee and Mississippi by around 11 o'clock tomorrow night. So that's the bigger concern with that line of storms. For the rest of this region through the Ohio Valley and the lower Mississippi Valley, you'll notice storms will fire up back through Missouri around 4 o'clock tomorrow, and eventually that line will develop. We'll see damaging wind potential all the way from Illinois back through Louisiana, and by the overnight hours, storms should start to weaken, and we'll not really be talking about much of any severe weather potential after around, I would say, midnight or so tomorrow. Low threat overall. Now, back through the Midwest, I mentioned this earlier, there is a chance for some snow once we go into late Sunday into Monday. Overall accumulation should stay very minimal, and it will melt fairly quickly, but there is going to be a chance for maybe an isolated inch or two of snow back through areas in the Midwest. And in terms of the snowfall accumulation, I'm not too concerned about 1 to 2 feet of snow, even though the European model does indicate that. I would expect a reasonable few inches of snow back through western Wisconsin and as well as into Minnesota. There's also a low-end threat of severe weather as we go into Sunday. That's primarily for those in Georgia and South Carolina and that slight risk, but that threat does extend back through Michigan. Damaging winds is the main threat, and believe it or not, the Storm Prediction Center has issued a slight risk for severe weather next Thursday. This is for those in Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. We'll be watching this very closely over the next several days. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like the video and subscribe if you've not already.